So we are really grateful for the opportunity to showcase neuroscience research here at UC Davis today. This is an auspicious time to highlight innovations in neuroscience, since it is the 30th anniversary of the Center for Neuroscience. The center was one of the first neuroscience centers in the country, and it was the first interdisciplinary center here at UC Davis. It was established in 1992, so about 30 years ago, and since then, neuroscience has grown steadily to become one of the most fundamental strengths here at UC Davis, with more than 300 faculty that are located in 12 centers and 41 departments across 5 colleges and schools across all of our campuses. So this year, we're also celebrating the establishment of the UC Davis Neuroscience Consortium, which brings together these faculty to enhance collaboration and interdisciplinary research. So I would really like to encourage you to check out the breadth and depth of neuroscience. You're just going to get a taste for that today, but there's a lot within this field at UC Davis. So please check out our ucdnc.ucdavis.edu website. So today we are going to focus on 3 of the most exciting areas of neuroscience research here at UC Davis. And we're going to start with a topic that many of us are interested in, which is optimizing brain health throughout the lifespan. This topic is led today by Dr. Charlie DeCarli, who is the Distinguished Professor of Neurology at UC Davis and the recipient of the Victor and Genevieve Orsi Chair in Alzheimer's Research. He is the director of the UC Davis Alzheimer's Disease Center, which is a United States National Institutes of Health funded Alzheimer's Research Center. Dr. DeCarli is also the director of the Imaging of Dementia and Aging, or the IDEA Laboratory. His research focuses on using advanced structural and functional brain imaging to study normal aging, mild cognitive impairment, and dementia, and the role of genetics, diversity, cerebrovascular, and Alzheimer's disease on these processes. So Dr. DeCarli, please join me up on stage.
Thank you so much. Oh, there we go. It's a pleasure to be here. Actually, it's the 31st birthday of the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center as well. We've been funded for 31 years and moved from an ADCC to a research center just recently. So this is a great place to be, you all.
So, Dr. DeCarli, I want to start by bringing up an issue that many of us are concerned about, which is memory loss as we get older. Everyone has heard of and fears Alzheimer's disease, but there are many different types of dementia. So could you tell us a little bit about how age-related memory loss and Alzheimer's disease and other dementias differ from one another and what characterizes them?
Do we have a few hours or a seminar series?
How about briefly?
So yes, the most important point is to understand that there are different types of dementias. And to begin with, too, is to understand that as we get older, 2 things happen to us. One is we take on more responsibilities. And 2, the most common cognitive differences that occur as we get older is that we were born with a CPU that had only, 16-bit access and not a lot of RAM there going. And so that diminishes as we get older. And so a little bit of forgetfulness, particularly for names of people, or my favorite one is, that Beatles song, the one with, oh, golly, I can't tell you, but it'll come to me, is very, very common. So first off, rest that. But almost all diseases that affect the brain, short of vascular disease, have something to do with abnormal polymerization of proteins. So whether they be the Alzheimer's proteins, which is the tau and the amyloid, the Lewy body proteins, which is alpha-synuclein, TDP-43, all of these proteins have a consistency in that they are what cause the neurodegeneration. And they manifest in slightly different ways clinically. And so the classic Alzheimer's, where you have memory, followed by a little bit of trouble with attention and complex tasks, and then a little trouble with language and coming up with the words. What I call empty speech is not just you can't remember the Beatles' White Album, but you can't even articulate that it's the Beatles' White Album, okay? That's Alzheimer's disease. Everything else kind of varies off of that. And it's a bit complicated to say, but I think the key features is understanding these biological processes that lead to the neurodegeneration.
So why does some people get Alzheimer's disease at young ages and other people live to 100 without any age-related memory loss?
Yeah, that's actually right out of my grant for the center. That's what we're trying to understand. I think that the way I think about it is that there are areas of brain development. So in that, Kim and I share this understanding of how well does your brain develop, so reaches its maximum ability, and then how well can it sustain itself to either prevent injury processes, such as Alzheimer's, Lewy bodies, etc., or withstand them. So one's a kind of like a resilience and one is kind of like a reserve where you can take a few hits and still manage to do okay even though the pathology is there. What we believe is happening is that it's the combination of how you developed and then life experience that accumulate over time as, you know, sort of dementia by 1,000 paper cuts. So the more diseases that you have, the more likely you are to be demented. And the notion that Alzheimer's disease or Lewy body disease occurs as a singular disorder is now thought to be passé. Alzheimer's disease is the most common pathology in the brain, but the people who are demented often have multiple pathologies in the brain. So it's Alzheimer's plus vascular disease, Alzheimer's plus Lewy body disease, etc. Younger people who get it before the ages, say, 50s or 60s, those people have specific susceptibility features, either a primary genetic, where I call a mutation, which is definite and causes the disease, from those who have high-risk genetic influences like the apolipoprotein E, for example. So I know that's a long-winded way of saying that, but I think how we get through life begins where we start and how well. So people like Dr. McAllister are trying to understand how to make the best brains possible, and then how many hits we get and what we do with that.
So we're showing a slide above you that shows the different trajectories of brain health throughout the lifespan. And clearly, as we're talking about, some individuals experience at some point their trajectory of brain health veering away from healthy brains. And so we typically think of Alzheimer's disease and memory loss as things that we need to worry about when we are older. But how can thinking about this healthy trajectory help us to understand Alzheimer's disease and maybe treat it?
Thank you for that question. So the important point is this idea of what's happening in your early to middle life and what can you do to modify that. And in a sense, it fits very nicely in what we understand about cancer, heart disease, etc., is looking at the things that you can do in your life to modify the impact of normal illnesses. And let me take a common medical illness, hypertension, okay? In this group of individuals, just looking across, there's probably between 25 and 40% of you who are either have diagnosed or undiagnosed hypertension, okay? Some of you are being treated very effectively, others are not being quite as well treated. And that kind of thing is what we need to focus on, is reducing those cumulative risk factors that we can control. And that includes lifestyle choices. The big one is, even though people talk about smoking as hazardous to your health, it's really, its role in Alzheimer's disease is not certain. So I just sort of put that aside. It's not good for your heart, and what's not good for your heart is not good for your brain. But other things you can do, like exercise, and then this whole issue about diet. And diet is really important. in that you make lifestyle changes in your diet and you start young. So we really do understand that there are certain cultural diets that have a substantial impact on whether you're going to develop a late life dementia. And that's this quote Mediterranean. And now it's been kind of evolved into a brain health diet. The other things are exercise. And I would say if you were going to pick one thing to do, which we don't like to do, but the one thing is to exercise. And what do I mean by exercise? I don't mean that you have to run a marathon every week. What I'm talking about is 20 to 30 minutes of walking up 3 to 5 times a week. That is all you need. And in fact, there's really good evidence that even modest exercise is quite helpful. Once you get up to, like a professional sports person, it really doesn't give you any more advantage. And the type of exercise, we tend to think more cardiovascular, but we don't really know yet. So I would say any type. That can include yoga, that can include, strengthening as well. So flexibility, strengthening, and cardiovascular, and some mix to that would probably be the best. So as individuals, what can we do? These are the things that we can do with our lifestyle. And then anytime we have a medical illness, to address that illness and try to get into what we call ideal control, whether it would be your glucose, your blood pressure, or your cholesterol. I hope that answers the question.
It absolutely does. So what I'm hearing is that if we haven't developed these healthy habits for our heart or for our bodily health, that if we want to improve our mental health and our brain health as we age, that we should think about doing those now.
Right.
Yeah.
In fact, just so you understand that when you look at people after they've passed and you look at their brains, above the age of 80 years, almost all of them have some degree of cerebrovascular disease. So it's almost ubiquitous. And again, it's not that that's causing the dementia. What it's doing is shrinking that reserve. So anything else on top of that sets you up to be susceptible to the expression of dementia syndromes. And none of us want to have that.
So wouldn't it be great if we could come up with a way of identifying when people veer off onto an unhealthy trajectory so that we could let them know that it's maybe even more important to do these things?
Right. And this leads into the importance of what we're calling biomarkers, so that we are able to see the pathologies that are occurring in the brain before those symptomatologies are evident. And in fact, for Alzheimer's disease, we've reclassified Alzheimer's disease to using biomarkers to the presence of amyloidosis in the brain as a preclinical phenomenon. We don't know exactly what it means yet, but we're using biomarkers, and the goal is that for every individual, we have a precision medicine approach using these available biomarkers and things that haven't been developed. And here's where I'm going to talk about the clinical translational, and that is, the things we can do are find those markers that would tell us where we veer off. And they could be through passive monitoring, they could be through active monitoring, they could be through new protein measures in the blood, the urine, less so in the CSF, fancy new imaging techniques. There's a host of genetics, understanding, making polygenetic risk scores to see who may be more susceptible based on whatever. And often these polygenetic risk scores interact, so they make you susceptible, but it's because there's some other life factor that's going on that you might be able to modify. So I hope I answered that question.
Absolutely. So it sounds like you're going to need teams of researchers with lots of different areas of expertise to come together to address some of these issues, especially as you get into precision medicine and wanting to come up with new treatments for individual cases. So I know that the Alzheimer's Research Center cares deeply about team science. So can you tell us a little bit about that and about some of the opportunities to get involved?
Yes, thank you so much. So we do care deeply about team science. And in fact, over the 30 years, we have collaborated with almost every department and I know at least most of the schools in the university. And we do that through what used to be called a pilot projects program, where you were given a fixed amount of money. And now we've changed to what's called a developmental projects program. And this development projects program is designed to work like, if those of you are familiar with NIH, are U grants, where it's a collaborative relationship in which we, as the Alzheimer's Disease Center, have set aside about $100,000 a year to invest in scientists on campus to help them develop a career in Alzheimer's or Alzheimer's disease or related dementias, or any unique and novel. And in fact, of the speakers today, everyone has received a grant from our center. So this is something we're very excited about, and we seek to get this out to you all. We also have an Alzheimer's Disease Symposium. Some of you may have actually been there. We do this every year, where we announce our program and to reiterate how we're here to help, and we look for novel ideas at every level. And then the last thing I want to say before I get too long-winded is we also emphasize training. So we have actually money to have what's called our research educational component, where we help pay for scholars who may be at any level from pre-doctoral to postdoctoral to junior faculty, to help them with travel or education that may be related to unique things that they need to pursue their career.
So, Dr. DeCarli, your center is incredibly well funded by the National Institutes of Health, but I would imagine that that might not go far enough to be able to give you the resources that you need to do this kind of team science. So can you tell us about some of the things, some of the other ways that you're funding this research?
Yeah, so I think that this is a really good point, is that the NIH, as you all probably know, is fairly restrictive. You write a grant, you have to do these things. It does not leave a lot of creativity. The NIH is a fairly conservative government entity. So what we look for are foundational grants and philanthropy to help us, and where we emphasize. So I'm, for example, the ORSI chair. My chair goes to training grants. And my goal with training grants is to encourage young people, because I'm getting to be an old fart, and I want more people to come in and follow me and become exciting scientists in this area. So where can we be the most effective are when we get these foundation grants or philanthropy, where we can do things to encourage training, but also to do high risk, high reward research. And I think that's something that we try to emphasize. We're doing a little bit of that. We set aside a little bit of that of our developmental award to pick one high risk project, but that's where we can have the biggest impact. You know, I think a lot of times people talk about in philanthropy, I want a building. I don't care about a building. What I want to do is be able to have a little bit of stash to do these interesting things and to train up people. So that's where I ask my, who are thinking about giving to this, to focus their energies.
Great.
Unless if they want to buy me a building, that is absolutely okay.
Right, you have to have space to house all of these amazing researchers
Yes,
together.
that's true.
So, yeah,
That's
yeah,
true.
Yeah. So you talk about high risk, high reward. Can you give us a flavor of what some of the most exciting directions are to you right now if resources were not an issue?
Were resources not an issue?
In Alzheimer's research.
In Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah.
I think that I'd take a step back, and that is what I would believe would be the most exciting would be understanding the basic mechanisms of neural development, connectivity, and sustaining that connectivity. And it'll be great because we're going to be having a conversation about that. And I think this is high risk, but potential high reward. And I believe that, of course, anything that translates into effective therapy. So we are really positioned to understand the basic mechanisms of Alzheimer's disease in particular, but we fail to translate those into effective treatments, even though you probably have all heard about aducanumab. That is an early kind of brute force. I'm going to just grab these abnormal proteins and pull them out of the brain. I would rather prefer that they not ever get in there in the first place. And why does that happen? Well, we certainly know it has something to do with the membranes of our cells and how those cell membranes change with age. So I think there's a whole area out there that's rich for investigation, but it may go nowhere at first. And so that's where I think we should be focused.
Right. So you're talking about basic science and bringing basic science into developing companies and developing products.
Right. And
Great.
I thought that's why we're here today.
I think that is why we're here.
Okay,
today.
good.
Yeah, great. Okay, so before we let you go, we've got about 5 more minutes. I know that we would all benefit from hearing about what you've learned along your impressive career. Again, we've got about 7 minutes. You've learned a lot. And if you'd frame it to answer the question of what advice you might have for some of the researchers that are in the audience that are just starting out, some of the students here.
Okay, I would say the one thing about my career that I continually reflect upon is finding mentors. So if you're a student, find somebody that you think you want to become and visit with them. And, I guess my time's up. And visit with them and pick their brains. And it's okay to mimic somebody who's doing a good thing. Across my experience, I have a handful of mentors who stepped in at every part of the way to make me successful. I'm sure some of them wished I was a little more successful than I am, but that they were keen. The second thing, and this is the second lesson I've learned, is do something that you're passionate about. I know sometimes researchers get into a place where their current line of research isn't sexy for the NIH, so they try to change gears. That's okay if that changing gears is in something that you understand and wish to grow in that area. Because right now, for example, the NIA went from a $1 billion a year institute to a $3 billion and hopefully will be a $4 billion a year institute. That we hope that encourages all of you to get on board and join us in our fight. However, if it's not your stick, don't do it, okay? And then the last thing I would say is persevere. Man, reviewers suck. I mean, and it's funny because I've been a chair and I've been an editor, and it's so funny somebody will come up, I know who reviewed that, and I'll say, oh, okay, and they'll tell me about somebody they hate, and actually it was one of their friends. So persevere, because everybody has their own ideas, and I just take Stanley Rappaport in the Laboratory of Neuroscience, where I trained at the NIH, said to me, when we'd get an article rejected, he'd say to me, good. What? Stanley, come on, man. And he'd say, yeah, that means we're smarter than the reviewers. So hang in there. It works. It's hard sometimes. It can be very challenging, but we're doing the good work here.
Well, I could ask more questions, but I think that's a wonderful place to end this conversation on. Thank you so much. It's really
You're
for all
welcome.
the work that you do. Terrific.